Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this exciting session titled Pushing the Frontiers of Medicine. I'm Hee-Kyung Kim, reporter and anchor and deputy head of the International News Department at a broadcasting company called MBN, based in Seoul, Korea. I'm thrilled to once again be a part of the OECD Forum, which marks its 20th anniversary. Congratulations, especially with such a distinguished panel of speakers, whom I will be introducing in just a moment. As you know, new technologies are giving hope and raising expectations in ensuring better treatment and prevention of diseases and actually improving overall wellness. In particular, the science of genomics and genomic medicine, which can be considered a subset of precision medicine, can bring about improvements in the care of patients by enabling more accurate diagnosis, safer treatment, and more opportunities for prevention. But as always, implementation will require new standards and policies, and also protection for individuals that are sharing necessary but very personal health information. This has actually been one of the most important recurring, if I may, issues that we've talked about over the years at the OECD Forum, the need for a more people-centered approach. We'll be talking about these topics and also about the challenges that lay ahead. To ensure optimal participation and easy interaction, we're utilizing this technologically enabled application called BCast. Whether you are joining us physically here or on the web, you can join in at any time through BCast and ask questions, provide comments, etc. So please do not hesitate to join in. Of course, I'll also be opening the floor for questions from the audience later on. And now to set the scene for today's discussion, let me introduce to you Dr. Thomas Siems, Chief Scientific Officer at Medirex in Slovakia, Head of the Genomics and Bioinformatics Department at Comenius University Science Park, and Director of Research and Development at an innovative SME called Geneton. Dr. Thomas Siems obtained his PhD in molecular biology and is a specialist in DNA analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now turn the mic over to Thomas Siems, please.
Thank you very much. So let me first introduce you to Slovakia a bit.
Even a small country like Slovakia, squeezed between the Tatras and the Danube, can be the birthplace of some great things. For almost 20 years, we have been introducing innovative diagnostic methods, helping physicians in Slovakia and abroad to establish diagnosis faster and with more precision, thus enabling them to set their patients on more efficient therapies.
So the topic that we opened already is called Pushing the Frontiers of the Medicine. And I would like to talk to you from the perspective of me as a scientist. So I, for about 12 years, focus on the topic of personalized medicine, and I would like to talk to you as a non-scientist and show you what can personalized medicine bring to the patient and to the society. I, as a scientist, typically write scientific papers, but we figured that one of our papers can make it to actual clinical practice. So we did partner with Medirex company, which was already introduced, and we managed to turn one scientific paper into a really popular test for pregnant women to test for defects of the fetus. So how does the current medicine work? It treats based on so-called guidelines, which is a manual for the doctor how to treat a patient based on his diagnosis. It treats an average patient, an average Jane or an average Joe. But this is not an optimal strategy because we are more or less far from the average person. And for that reason, as clinical trials seem to be deciding only based on average values, some of the drugs didn't make it to the customer, so to the healthcare. But we are, as mentioned, not standard or average. We are unique. And how unique are we? There are actually 2 to 3 million differences in our DNA which make us unique. These differences are called in our language variants, genetic variants. And some of them are responsible for the normal differences, so the color of our eyes or the color of our hair. But there are some differences that are not visible. For example, differences in how our metabolism works. Some of us are unable to process lactose, which is a sugar present in the milk, so patients with this are intolerant to milk. But there is a huge amount of variants that cause diseases. And the personalized medicine is based on these unique features of us. So it's a tailored way of treating patients based on his specific set of differences. And in that, there is a crucial role of medical diagnostics, and especially the novel technologies that appeared in the last 15 years, such as the new genomics technologies. So we know the structure of DNA for 66 years now, and we are able to read it based on the research that followed, and it took about 24 years for us to read very short stretches of the DNA. But every cell has about 3 billion such letters, and in 2 copies actually, and scientists always wanted to read all of that. It wasn't until 2006 that new technology arrived, which is called next generation sequencing, that allowed us to analyze the whole genome in under 1,000 euros as of today. This was quite different back 20 years back, when it cost about 100 million euros to test one individual for the whole genome. So what does the personalized medicine bring to the patient? What are the benefits? One of the key benefits today, and it's already been used, is modifying the treatment based on genetic information, and not just selecting the right drug, but also the correct dosage. We can also prevent severe disorders such as the cancer or cardiovascular diseases. We now have new options in prenatal care. We can test for birth defects of the babies by just testing the DNA, by just testing the blood isolated from the mother. And similarly, we can look for cancer, and we can do advanced diagnostics of cancer based on just analyzing the blood. This is called liquid biopsy. But not just our genes are important. We carry many microbes in our guts and almost everywhere, which are very important for our health. And since we are now able to read the whole DNA, we can also find candidates which need fixing, and currently there is a technology allowing us to fix genes. So how do we find the right treatment and dosage? When we treat headache, it doesn't really matter if we take aspirin or Tylenol, but for cancer treatment, there can be very serious adverse effects associated. And so it would be optimal to select the right drug and the right dosage for everyone. Unfortunately, guidelines only tell you which drug to use for a given diagnosis and what dosage is the standard one. But this works just for a subgroup of patients. Some other patients do not respond to such dosage, and for some, such treatment can be even toxic. So they don't have the enzyme to digest such a drug, and for them we need to select a different drugs. So based on genomic information, we can find out and select the right drug. But what's very important about personalized medicine, that based on this information from DNA, we can say that certain people are at higher risk of certain diseases. For example, just a month ago, sad news came out in our media that Dennis, who was aged 14, died during a football match because he suffered from sudden cardiac death. This was because he had a genetic predisposition for sudden cardiac death, but he wasn't aware of it. If personalized medicine would have been applied, he may have been alive now and saved from this horrible death. There is another group of disease that can be prevented, and this is cancer. Many of the cancers are caused by genetic predisposition, and if we know people have an increased risk of the cancer, we can manage them so that it doesn't happen or it's prevented. Of course, there is a large set of diseases which we cannot treat today, and for those, of course, it's not good for patients to know in advance. Thanks to technologies like of the genomic era, we now are able to do a safer medicine, for example, a prenatal care. We are able to detect major chromosomal errors by just looking at the DNA which was drawn from the mother. So this is a very precise method on which we also worked in our laboratories, and we developed our own test. But such tests are deployed throughout the world, and this is one of the most used genomic tests worldwide today. Just as we figured that there is fetal DNA present in the maternal blood, we now know that the tumor DNA of cancer patients can be found also in the blood. And thanks to the new technologies, we can find out, because the DNA of the tumor is quite different from the DNA of a normal cell. So in the near future, I believe, we will be able to do so-called liquid biopsy. So we will not need to pick up the tissue of a tumor. We will only look at the blood. So far I only spoke about the human DNA, but it's not the only DNA that matters in our body. The 3 billion letters code for about 20,000 human genes, but there are 150 times more genes present in our gut, and that is in the microbes that are present in our gut. And the microbes there have an important function. They help us in digesting the food, and especially to get the vitamins, but they are very important for our immunity. And as it goes, when something goes wrong with our microbes, disease come out. problems with our microbial diversity in our gut cause various diseases, and lately it was also associated with autism spectrum disorders. And in future, definitely microbes will be used for diagnostics. But we have another tool. It's not directly connected to the genomics, but it is a method to change, switch, or correct errors in the DNA. And this is the CRISPR-Cas9 technology. We can now cheaply and very effectively, very precisely modify selected genes. It works perfectly on mice models or rats, but it has already been applied to humans. You must have seen the news in February or March that a first CRISPR baby was born. This is really a topic to discuss, but definitely it shows that such technology could work also in humans. And this could be a solution to those genetic diseases where we currently have no treatment. But there are challenges associated with personalized medicine. This medicine is based on big data. Gigabytes of data need to be processed, and the whole biomedical knowledge in this field has to be considered. But the doctors are not taught to work with gigabytes of data. They only need one single answer to help them make a medical decision. Here, bioinformatics play a key role to turn gigabytes into a medically relevant answer. And some of the advantages of personalized medicine will require to think again about our e-health systems and their future. We will definitely need smart e-health systems. In that, also wearable devices can be of great help. For example, for the patients who need to be constantly monitored if they have a predisposition to cardiovascular disease. So the era of personalized medicine already helps and will help even more when we address technical challenges, but also the social ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I think his explanation helped us understand, helped everyone in the room, including myself, better understand the concept of this personalized precision medicine and what this research entails. Thomas, if you could take a seat. Yes, thank you very much. Now let me introduce our amazing panel of speakers. To my immediate right, Ms. Fiona Godfrey is with us. She is Secretary General of the European Public Health Alliance in Brussels and is also a standing candidate in the EU Parliament elections. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Frank Stevens, actor, author, and advocate, well known for his message, "My life is worth living," is also joining us. Welcome. Very nice to have you with us. And of course, Ms. Luisa Carcedo, Minister of Health, Consumption and Social Welfare of Spain, is joining us. Thank you very much for joining us. We have our speaker, of course, Thomas, sitting all the way at the end. Mr. Deepak Khanna, Senior Vice President and Regional President for Europe, Middle East and Canada at the pharmaceutical giant Merck. Thank you very much for joining us, Deepak. Mr. Šarūnas Narbutas, legal advisor to the President of Lithuania and co-founder of Youth Cancer Europe, is with us. As well as being a professional lawyer, strategic consultant, he's also a patient advocate. Thank you for coming. Welcome, everyone. I would like to make this session as interactive as possible, not only for our audience, but also for our panelists. So please feel free to jump in at any time with your comments or a different point of view. Before we begin the discussion, I've been told I have a very important question to ask the audience, and please answer this in a very prompt way. I'd like to ask each and every one of you in the audience to reply through Bcast, and I'll reveal the poll results later on, and perhaps we can incorporate the answer into the discussion. The question is, I believe we have the question on the screen. Yes. Would you want to know at a very early stage if you're likely to develop a particular disease based on your genetic makeup? Yes or no? Now, it's a simple question, but quite thought-provoking, so please do answer. And having brought up this possibly sensitive issue of whether someone would like to know before any kind of symptom has arisen, if the chances were high that they would develop a certain kind of disease, I'd like to ask you, Fiona, first to share your thoughts on this.
Well, I can speak to this question not as a Secretary General of IFA, but I can speak to it as somebody who has actually been in this position. I found out only a few years ago that there is a family predisposition to motor neurone disease, or ALS, in my family, which seems to have affected lots of my family members who live on the other side of the world. And this provoked a lot of reflection on my part. And interestingly enough, I did want to know, and I did want to do the test, but I had a lot of discussions with my family about this, in particular my husband, because we have children. And of course, for motor neurone disease, there is no cure. And it's not a particularly nice disease for those of you who are familiar with it. But I went ahead and I had the genetic testing. But interestingly enough, other family members were absolutely adamant that they did not want to be tested. And one of the reasons was because there is no known cure at the moment for ALS or MND. But I did it because I would have made certain life choices depending on the results, positive or negative. And I also wanted to contribute to the general sort of knowledge field in this area as someone who works in public health.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Luisa, please. You're the Minister of Health, Consumption and Social Welfare of Spain, but you are also a doctor. Now, I would like to ask you about this matter. I think most of us recognize the potential of precision medicine, but I think you'll agree that a major factor in this is the accessibility of these treatments. Now, how many will be able to gain from this medical technology?
The speaker's going to have to speak with a microphone. The speaker's going to have to speak with a microphone so that the interpreters can hear. Yes, I was saying that in Spain, we have two fundamental principles in our National Health Service. First of all, the universality, and then equity. What this means is that anyone who needs treatment, either through traditional medicine, treatment that is now well developed, or this new dimension, these new genetic treatments, well, either because they need treatment, well, everybody should have access. And we believe that there should be equity in terms of the quality of the treatment that is provided to the people. So it's really up to those who are in charge of managing the National Health Service to make sure that these new treatments are fully available. So we need to ensure that the system is universal and that everybody has access, and secondly, that they can receive the treatment that they need, and this treatment should be of the same quality, and the same criteria should apply to everybody. And on the basis of those two principles, we have introduced precision medicine in our National Health Service with a number of criteria.
Of course, the same quality of prevention, treatment should be available to everyone, but sometimes this is not the case in reality. Deepak, I know Merck has done extensive research in this area with special tests to ensure more accurate implementation of personalized medicine. Again, adding on accessibility, I would like to ask about the question of cost. Now, will these certain types of treatments be available to only those that can afford them?
Thanks, Hee-kyung. So let's just start with the OECD. They've laid out several times, there's three major objectives, right? One is to ensure that treatments are accessible to as many patients as possible. Two is to ensure that the healthcare system remains affordable and sustainable. And three is that we secure innovation. So the challenge with these three objectives is sometimes they can conflict, right? How do you do all three of these at the same time? One of the things that I'll point out on cancer care in particular is, the actual spending on cancer care, when you take a look at it as a percent of the healthcare expenditure, it's been pretty stable over the last 20 years. It's about 6%. So what we really need to look at is how do we fund more of the newer innovations that may have a benefit, and look at some of the older innovations, and how do we deprioritize? What's the right way to spend? But in order to do that, we really need to make sure that the new innovations, we demonstrate value, right? Is it the right spend to be able to have? So I think that's one, is to really look at our prioritized funding. But the other piece that's even more important, and I think the ministers suggested this as well, is the importance of collaboration with the complexity of new medicines. When you think of new medicines coming in the old days, it could be one innovation that might treat one type of cancer. Now you could have an innovation that could treat 20 types of cancer. And some of these may use a diagnostic. Some of these may be in combination with another drug. Some of these may be in very early settings. So with all of that complexity, what we really need to do is work together to ensure that people understand why we're having a diagnostic, people understand what this medicine is for. I think health literacy becomes very important. People really need to know why we're investing and what choices we're investing in. Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the Surinus, the role of patients, Deepak talked about collaboration, of course, following the minister's comments. I think the role of patient has evolved from being on the receiving end to taking on a more active role. Surinus, if you could answer this one. I think the role of patient as navigator cannot be more emphasized than in the case that we're talking about, with the collaboration part. But naturally, there's always difficulty when you have to share, and I think Thomas touched upon this subject earlier in his speech, is the problem of sharing sensitive health information. Jonas, I think you have personal experience in this area.
So you made a couple of points there, but I'll start from then. As you said, I'm a leukemia patient living for 12 years. And I'm a lawyer as well, and specializing in life sciences, and being in the public field. As I'm no longer advisor to the president. For clarification, there's a new election going on right now. But I still work actively in the public field, and being a patient and a patient advocate. So there's different elements of what you see the healthcare system is. So personal experience is that, yes, I do want to have the data in my hands that I'm in control of, so I can decide who is making decisions based on what data they get. The problem is, it is not a reality in most of the cases. If we're using apps, we're efficiently handing our data to third parties, which most of the time are commercial parties. If we're using healthcare system, that data we would assume is good because it is collected by the government and then really making decisions to improve the effectiveness in the system. In Lithuania, we have an efficient e-health system. We can prescribe medicines. I can see my test results from my phone. We are now going to register to the physicians via e-health system. But actually, I do not really see that analytics is a strong side of public health systems, that the governments know what to do with that vast amount of data that is being collected. And often, actually, it backfires because they say, look, if there is this number of patients we will need to treat with this new therapy or these new diagnostics, that will be unbearable costs, while they are not looking at how these costs could be used more efficiently in the vast amount of the hospitals that are there in the country. So in OECD countries, it's from 18 to 23% of a healthcare budget is going to the drugs. That meaning 80%, 78 to 80 something percent goes into other stationary healthcare. So which is the cost we endure in the hospitals, and now we know with an aging society that it has to change. So how we see it's always a shifting landscape. As a patient, to navigate through healthcare system, which is increasingly difficult. And it's not just the patient that faces it, but the caregivers, and of course we have socioeconomic domain into it. I guess we will speak about it later. But also for the decision makers in the healthcare system, we see every country in the world needs more health expenditure every year. It's not going less. It's not like we are curing diseases, and if we are curing diseases, then people live longer, they develop other diseases. And that is one-way cycle. So how I see it, like right now, when in the session before it was a plea for universal basic income, for the new social contract, I see that now it is a bit of a time for the health ministers, for all stakeholders in health, to speak with the financial ministers, that it's not a cost that we are speaking about why we need more money into health, but that's investment. If we do better by not just giving money to health, but by improving efficiency in the healthcare systems for the patients to get the medicine faster, to get to the doctor faster, to not travel thousands of kilometers or use e-health solutions that are cheaper. For the public officials to see that we actually can review how our network is being structured. We always see there are fights in one city. I can cite, for instance, one city in Italy for cancer where we have 5 wonderful cancer centers, but you do not need 5 competing cancer centers in one city. You need one. But there is no way in a way how the politics are being run these days that these will be closed. So you are multiplying these efforts. So and the last point I would make is that we speak so much about the costs of drugs, but we do not focus on the costs of diagnostics and medical tests. And this is something which contributes a bigger and bigger part of an expenditure in healthcare system. But we are now a bit of the different camps. Reduce the price for the drugs, and others are saying do efficiently in the healthcare system. And there are more elements within the healthcare system that can reduce that cost. And now coming back to the patient or the patient advocacy side, we are actually now in Europe doing well because we contribute to decision making. Because of EU policies, because of the policies at national level, we are invited to the table to join and represent the interests of the patients when decisions are being made. But it's not a reality in many countries. And you are facing mental challenges when you speak in South America, when you speak Africa, you speak Asia. These are the countries that need a lot of attention because the biggest numbers of patients, the biggest untapped needs into whatever disease conditions are in those continents.
Thank you very much, Srunas. Yes, Deepak, please.
I just want to add, Srunas, if every patient was as informed as you are, you'd have this incredible benefit to society, right? One of the big challenges we have is that governments and societies have this obligation to ensure that we have the right health literacy. If an individual understands how to navigate through their disease and understands how to navigate through the healthcare system, particularly in the future when innovations will have complexities like I talked about earlier. I think that's so important for our patients to really have the right type of outcomes.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to go back to what you were saying about citizens and patients in the EU. I mean, the data and surveys show that, at least in the European Union, patients and citizens are very happy for their data to be shared as long as they can see an individual benefit or a general societal benefit. But there is concern about misuse of data. I think we have to pay more attention to this issue and look at how we could avoid the risk of the commoditization of data, because I think that's a big concern. We do have patients being brought into the discussion, but still we need wider society and more citizens to be discussing this, because some of the key ethical issues are still not there. Data is a new asset. A lot of people want to get their hands on that data, and the primary source of the data is the individual. So society and the individual should be the beneficiary. One proposal which has been put forward is for health data cooperatives, which would keep the data within the scientific community and allow research to take place, but the data would be managed and owned by members of that platform. They don't seem to exist anywhere, but it's an idea which has been put forward. And finally, I think if you look at the policy landscape for this, it's extremely fragmented. When you're talking about data privacy and when you're looking at research articles on it, they all mention the importance of privacy, but there's not often very much mention of words like solidarity or phrases like the common good or group rights, to go back to what the Minister was saying about fundamental principles and access to universal health care and equity. And I think this debate would benefit from more discussion about some of these issues as well.
Yes, excellent point. Louisa, please.
Well, talking about costs and the impact for health and the impact for the economy, I think that we're talking about factors here that are related to the genetic makeup. We know that there is a whole new world opening up to us, but the role of patients and the role of prevention is very important. And we can see that it's very important. And because we don't have active involvement of patients, we don't have equality or equity. We also have the social and also environmental factors that weigh on health. And we think that here the patients, or the citizens generally, have a very important role to play in mitigating those social and environmental factors. There are factors, for example, when you talk about cancer, if you smoke, just mention something that everybody knows about, and that's not being challenged. We know that preventing cancer linked to smoking is easier. It's much easier to prevent addictions than, for example, to carry out genetic research, because there's a direct causality there between smoking and cancer. But we know that there are other diseases or conditions that are linked to the genetic makeup. For example, diabetes is linked to genetic factors. This is something that is now well understood, and diabetes has taken on epidemic proportions. We know that it's linked to obesity. We know that it's linked to nutrition and diet. We know that obesity is also linked to poverty or a poor diet or an unbalanced diet. And so I think that these are aspects that we also need to think about. And also looking at the life habits of citizens, because let's not talk about patients. Anybody can be a patient. Let's talk about citizens. It's very important that people can manage their own health by making the right choices. Finally, I'd very quickly like to talk about data and the importance of data. Data in precision medicine or personalized medicine are, of course, extremely important. But protecting those data, in particular personal data, that is a responsibility of the health systems also. And it's always possible to anonymize data so that we can then use data for scientific or research purposes, but by protecting the identity of the person to who that data belongs. Because, of course, it's very important to be able to analyze the outcomes, the health outcomes of certain treatments, but we also need to protect the identity, the personal identity of the person providing the data. So we need to be able to measure health outcomes whilst at the same time protecting the personal identity of the person who's provided the data.
Yes. Yes, we were touching upon so many different aspects of this topic: management of data, government implementation, and patient participation. Just before we hear from Fiona again, let me just touch upon the subject of patient participation once again. And I just want to, I think Frank has a message that he wants to convey, so let's listen to his message first. Frank, please.
Thank you. Hello? Good afternoon, everyone. I confess, I have my tablet, and I have some notes to guide me. It is a characteristic of Down syndrome that I process information more slowly than the rest of you. Well, maybe not slower than the British processing a brisket. But you get the idea. If my comments seem to be a little behind or not fully formed, please just try to connect the dots with me. Thank you.
Would you like to continue?
I can only give you two of the experience of people with Down syndrome. There is more. There is a little or no work being done to research ways to help the relatively small number of people with Down syndrome improve their functioning. There are many companies producing prenatal tests which they hope to market all pregnancies. I am pretty sure that personal revenue plays a role here. Sorry. What am I doing? Okay. Certainly, ordinary people will need help with these hard questions. My concern is that health systems and even governments may be influenced by their own money issues and may not be reliable sources of help. People like me with Down syndrome already live at the frontiers of medicine. We are living examples of the promise and the threat of gene-driven medicine. On the one hand, our extra chromosome is a blueprint for research into gene-based treatments for soft tissue cancer and heart disease, immune system disorders, and Alzheimer's disease. We are thrilled to be able to contribute to research in this way. On the other hand, our unique DNA is being targeted for identification by early prenatal tests. Those test results are combined with outdated negative information about life. with Down syndrome to encourage terminations. I am here as a metaphorical canary in the coal mine to warn you that genomic testing will not stop at identifying Down syndrome. It can identify thousands of other characteristics. I suggest to the panel that society has an obligation to slow down and take a hard look at the ethics of choosing any group of humans for extinction. For those, several nations have expressed the view that they expect to be Down syndrome free by 2030. They are not curing Down syndrome. They are eradicating people who have it. Please just insert the name of any ethnic minority in that phrase about being free of them by 2030. Wouldn't you have an ethical problem with that? I would like to recommend 4 things. 1, that OECD support efforts to develop databases of medical information for small population candidates. 2, that the OECD support the development of up-to-date and accurate information concerning life with genetic differences. 3rd, that the OECD support the development of ethical guidelines that apply to all humans equally before gene-driven treatments or eliminations are applied to human beings. Finally, I recommend to all of you, come learn more about life with Down syndrome. When I present a 15-15 performance in room, whenever at 14:45 today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. You did wonderfully. He raised the sobering issue of ethics in this bit to the process that we are talking about. I think, Fiona, you wanted to add something to that?
My point was, well, it wasn't the ethics point per se. I wanted to go back to the words prevention that was mentioned by both our scene setter and the minister. But actually a phrase that you just mentioned, Frank, something you just said was slow down. And that resonates with me because I'm intrigued by the idea of personalised medicine as a prevention measure. Because, of course, in public health, we've been preaching the value of prevention for years and not always getting very far. And I appreciated the minister raising it, but she appeared to be raising it from a more individual perspective, perhaps not completely, but putting the onus on the individual to make changes to lifestyle. But, of course, prevention is the big elephant in the room here, population level prevention, because there is so much that we could be doing. We know what works, and we know what works to prevent a lot of illness and disease, or at least to really, really delay it, and we're not doing it. So, we could just be doing absolutely basic things like sugar and soda taxes. We could be implementing proper, tobacco control legislation as it should be implemented. We could be raising taxes on alcohol. We could have labelling on alcohol. alcohol products and food products that are unhealthy. A lot of this would already work to prevent a lot of the diseases that personalised medicine is targeting, and it would have the twofold benefit of actually raising some revenue as well as preventing some disease. And we could then perhaps focus scarce public resources and devote personalised medicine to curing some of these diseases that we don't actually have a cure for yet and which can't be prevented any other way. So I think from the public health perspective, very much in favour of prevention, but can we not lose sight of the role that population level prevention could play in actually contributing to helping pay for and facilitate the personalised medicine revolution as well.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Again, I would like to go back to the implementation part. I think, Shurunas, you mentioned the financial ministry and the health ministries having to collaborate and the difficulty in doing so also. So, Luisa, you would like to add something to this?
Sí, bueno.
Yes, well, of course, public health is a fundamental public policy. And since the Alma Ata Declaration 30 years ago, the World Health Organization has been recommending that health systems do this. And in Spain, this is a fundamental part of our primary care in hospitals and in health centers. And we've just carried out a reform to further strengthen our primary care, and we've called this reform strengthening the framework for primary and community care, meaning focusing on prevention when it comes to primary health care. And indeed, genomics and precision medicine are fundamental. But there is a huge role to play for prevention without, beyond the shadow of a doubt. I also wanted to react to the question about implementation when it comes to precision medicine or all of these genetic medicines. How can this be implemented without further inequalities or without focusing on the people who can afford this medicine? When I first spoke, I said that our fundamental principles are universality and equity. And what we are doing now is a huge endeavor, because in our health system, we have chosen to include these therapies, but we want to make sure that they are provided equally to all citizens. And we have therefore designed a system which focuses on the prognosis, meaning that the people who prescribe these treatments need to be experts that are fully knowledgeable and skillful in carrying out these treatments. And all of the system, from our autonomous communities to our local governments, needs to be on board with the project. This is why, from the diagnostic to the choice of centers that will be delivering these treatments, we need to make sure that we have the right practitioners, the most experienced practitioners who will be carrying out these treatments in the safest possible way for our patients. And this will provide for our two principles of universality and equity. There are two other characteristics I'd like to mention very briefly now. First of all, we have public medical research, which means we are much better equipped when it comes to bargaining with the pharmaceutical industry and purchasing the drugs we need. The second issue is that in our bargaining with pharmaceutical companies, we introduced a criterion which is cost effectiveness, meaning the price has to be linked to the outcome the drug actually has. And I won't speak for any longer right now. Thank you.
You talked about equality and the focus on prognosis. Shrunas, if I may, you mentioned, and we all know that you're a lawyer, practicing lawyer, and going back to the implementation point, I was just wondering, we're talking about government, we're talking about the protection of data, but are the laws updated? Of course, it's different for each country, but I think that part is also very important.
So I think the big hot topic nowadays in health sector is about GDPR in Europe, General Data Protection Regulation. So actually the safety side is settled, but I would say from the patient's perspective, that went overboard. It's overprotecting. And that's not just overprotecting patients, that's also not allowing the governments to collect the data, what they used to collect. And that also means that it's a different barrier from the research you could generate out of the clinical practice. The big data you get in your hospital, you can now not use it for the research because it was implemented, it was collected through the just general practice, so you cannot use it to advance your research. So there's a lot of these things that we know, we have laws. The problem is sometimes we are not really sure about what we're doing in the laws. So there's actually what was reflected by Fiona as well, that patients in general in Europe are willing to share the data. So there was a survey done by European Commission asking patients whether they are eager to share more data compared to what the authorities said. And the patients cohort was saying, we want to share more, so ask us what we want to share, not let others decide, that it's all about precluding and safeguarding interests of patients. So when the regulation was being enforced, it was the majority of lobby was being done by IT companies, that we need this and etc. But the whole health sector was fighting that actually it will hinder research. I cannot judge if it will happen or not. Currently, I see that every country in the European Union is struggling in health sector to know what to do about it, how to collect the data we used to collect. And speaking further, that there is still a directive that we should move towards the digital health, towards creating a national e-health systems, towards them being interlinked. And an example of that how the laws could help, we have a cross-border healthcare directive. Again, sorry for speaking European Union-centric, and the OECD is broader than that. But it should allow the patients to travel abroad and receive the treatment and get their data exchange. And the problem is, how I see it, that actually the governments are hindering the progress in that regard. In what way? That they do not want money moving from their healthcare system to move to different healthcare system. So they are not actually empowering patients to use those rights. And before adopting the directive, the survey was done at EU level. Where 1% of patients have said that I know that I can travel abroad. Now with that directive being implemented for 7 years, there's 1.5% patients knowing that. So there's not much of increase in that regard. So in terms about what we can do to collect the data that is meaningful, that is a mainstream debate that we should be having. And exactly in the terms of the precision medicine or the general population screening, there's a lot of what IT giants have. They have bigger sets of data than all healthcare systems combined. And they are the ones that are not being actually supervised how we use that data, what we get it out of all the digital through the social media. And this is where we're actually falling behind. So you have someone with a lot of tools that we see are influencing our lives in different ways, social ways, economic ways, political ways. And the people who should be in charge of those tools, so governments or regulators, have no access to it. So we are a bit in the circle about, yes, we want more data, but the way we only think to generate the data is going to the private parties, to the third sources. That is the only way that we see it is where the data is being collected and used. And the data that we are collecting at major level, the big data that governments and OECD encourages to collect, is maybe being collected, but not allowed to be used. So it's a big paradox.
Being collected, but not being able to use it. To what extent should this information be shared? I think that is another big question. I can see, Thomas, you've been nodding there. I think you agree with some points that Sharunas made. Yes, please.
Yes, I have to say the promises are there for the precision medicine, but have not yet been delivered. And really the key point is for patients to share the data, especially for the diseases already mentioned, like the diabetes. We don't understand them fully, and patients would be very helpful in that by providing not just their genetic information, but their basic biochemical measurements, to better understand these diseases which affect much more people than, for example, rare genetic diseases, which we understand relatively well. So we really need to find a way for patients to participate more than they do currently. And I think the way to go would be a really regulated national e-health system, which would allow people in the research, in biomedical research, to access a limited set of information to accelerate their research, which will then benefit the new patients.
I was just wondering, and not all patients may agree with what you just said, but is there a way to make sure, make participation more easy for doctors to ask? Or, there's so many questions. Yeah, Shurenas, you'd like to add something?
I wanted to react in terms about what do we do? Or do we just keep in circle whining, or do we do something about it? So we've seen patient organizations that now we are going to collect our own data. So the patient organizations asking the patients who are part of organization to submit their own data in whatever type of registry, online form application or not. And that is a way to come up with the solutions that the hospitals are not allowed to collect right now, or the patients do not want to share all of the data with hospitals, or the same with the pharma company, that we cannot collect that data directly from the patients just through the, the third parties. So this is something that I see again as a big trend globally. So back to reality, in Lithuania, I'm president of our umbrella for all cancer patients. So we are collecting our own registry data for different cancers in there. The disease-specific area that I'm chairman of at the Global Networks, Chronic Myelogenous Leukemia, again, we started our own registry to collect the data from CML patients out there. And that is exactly to incorporate not just medical data, but a lot of the thing that patients speak about is the social burden that disease has. And so far, the healthcare systems are not really good at combining these two. The pure medical data that we see is coming from the therapy or from the hospital. And these are two silos already. And then we go broader about the impact it has of you skipping the work, living off the social benefits, not contributing to society, and the caregiver costs that you have. And these are the actual things that the patient experiences at the end. With co-payments, they have to endure for the food supplements that they maybe do not need, but due to their lack of health literacy, we do that. So all of these things about what you say, what can we do better? So, empower stakeholders to collect the data that they trust themselves and then showcase that it is meaningful.
Right. So it's not just a health, it's a financial, it's a judicial, it's a social issue. Fiona first, please.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think we have to face reality that if personalised medicine is really going to live up to its potential and meet expectations, then what we're talking about is really a very wholesale reform of existing health systems. And certainly in the EU, member states don't seem to be interested in that. We've had a debate on health technology assessments recently, which has not got very far. But we need to get out of our silos. That was exactly the right word to use. Healthcare workers need to embrace this. Patients need to embrace it. But we need to go much further. Citizens who are not yet patients, but who will be patients, need to be part of this discussion. We need to look at the hard facts. We need to look at the costs. People need to say, yes, I would be willing to pay this. I would not be willing to pay that. Let's look at the impact. Studies have been done in the US, for example, which show that if you could prove that there would be a definite positive impact from precision medicine, then co-payers might be willing to pay more if they can pay more. But let's not forget that lots of people are not in that position. They will never be able to pay for this if they have to. So I think this is part of a much wider debate about how we involve citizens in the major societal and scientific developments that we're facing now. And I think we have to the EU Commission says, well, we run consultations. Yes, they do, but they're online, and it tends to be those of us in the Brussels bubbles, and then perhaps a few committed patient societies like yours in Lithuania that might comment and contribute. But the vast majority of people out in society have no idea what personalised medicine is, and we really, really need to start with the basics, and we need to bring people on board from the very beginning, and we need to be involved from the start of this process. We're already in danger of missing that. We may already have missed that. We know that policies are being developed and guidelines are being developed without enough consultation with citizens. So I think, perhaps we could, this is such a big issue, perhaps we could take a leaf out of the Irish book. They held some very sensitive referendums in the last couple of years on same-sex marriage, and also on revising the abortion legislation in Ireland. And to do that, they held citizens' assemblies across the country, and they had a wide range of experts going out, talking to people, inviting ordinary people to come and debate the issues. And that led to some very, very positive results in Irish society. So I think that could be a model, and we need to think about doing that across our countries and member states.
Thank you, Fiona. Deepak, please.
Yeah, just reflecting on what Saronis and Fiona had to say, GDPR is essentially a framework, right? This is to provide governments with this framework, but in order for it to work, governments need to be able to show that they have the right structures in place, that the right controls in place to really guard the data. I think that's one thing, and once governments can show that, you're more likely, right? So that there's that concern. But the thing that really is important is one stakeholder can't fix it. It requires stakeholders across the entire healthcare system, including pharmaceutical companies, including the governments, including payers, including healthcare providers, including patients, to really work together if you're going to have any type of change to the system. I'll give one example. We did work with Belgium to try to have we looked at, on average, it was taking over 250 days to have access to innovation. So we worked on an agreement where we had this multi-year, multi-tumor agreement that over the next 3 years, we would have a certain level of budget. So we provided governments with this predictability and stability on what the cost would look like. We accelerated that access to innovation from, on average, 250 days to about 30 days. And what we see now is that over a 5-year period, there'll probably be an additional 5,000 life years gained by having earlier access to this innovation. Now, in order to look at that, we have to have access to the data so that we can actually answer the questions that the minister wants answered, which is, if we want to have the data, if we want to have the innovation, we have to be able to show that it's cost effective, that it's a better value than what we're currently doing. And the only way to be able to do that is to have all the stakeholders sitting together to find these solutions, but to have access to the right data to be able to answer the right questions.
Thomas.
I would like to add that the field of genomics is evolving fast in terms of methodology. So we will see very soon a genome analysis for 100 euros. That's almost certain. So, but the valid and medically valid interpretation is another issue, and this needs to be under national health control. And people tend to go for out-of-pocket paying for different tests which are not part of healthcare system, and they're provided with different results which may not be fully medically valid. So I don't think there are too many choices for not looking into it.
I think the minister wanted to add something. Luisa, please.
Well, very briefly on 2 or 3 things that have been mentioned. First of all, regarding data protection, I mentioned the fact that you codify diseases, and this is an international codification system that's very useful. And you can codify diseases whilst, of course, protecting the personal identity of the patient. I'd also like to indicate that health, it's not just hospitals. We all have all sorts of information that come from other sources. We have primary healthcare, for example. And for example, if you look at the GP knows who the patient is, where they live, what their family's like, what their social background is, what problems they might have in terms of unemployment or poverty. All that is handled by GPs and by the first line. And what we want is to give more importance to that. We can't see a person just as a patient. We have to see them in their social context, in their environmental context, because those social and environmental factors are going to have a major role in terms of the health of the person or the disease they might have. So when you look at treating a complex disease, you can't just look at hospitals. You have to look at the social and environmental aspects as well. And talking about the active role of patients and educating patients so that they understand health, and we need to make sure that people are empowered, that they can make the right life choices, that they can understand the risk that they might be under. And we need to make sure that they can get the right habits, life habits, so that they don't suffer addiction, that they have a right balanced diet, that they carry out exercise and sport activities, because we know that this has a major impact. So we can't just look at things from a health point of view. We have to look at it from a social economic point of view. And that's why the first line is so important, and we need to strengthen GPs and the first line. And then finally, on personalized medicine, just to mention very quickly that it's really fundamental in science. You have to make sure that this evolution, like many evolutions in the history of humanity, has to be positive. We need to make sure that it's a positive outcome and that it's not going to undermine the economic sustainability of national health services. So we need a framework. We need this to be organized. We need to make sure where this new personalized medicine really is a solution, either in terms of prevention or treatment. And that's one of the great challenges of the national health systems. So, of course, here we can't have a referendum, it seems to me, because a referendum is either yes or no, and nobody's going to say, no, we don't want a new innovation. We don't want a new treatment. And I'd just like to add one thing. Currently, cancers have a biochemical treatment. Treatment is mostly biochemical. And our project that I was mentioning previously with the new precision medicine and personalized medicine seeks precisely to take into account this new dimension. And they're not mutually exclusive. When you look at cancers that were resistant previously to more traditional chemical treatments, when you see that they can be cured with new personalized medicine or precision medicine, we can see that this presents huge hope, but we have to do it properly. In the case of Spain, the cost of the current treatment of cancer represents about 3% of drug expenditure in hospitals, and we're 10% for hospitals and 3% of general expenditure in health. And we're talking here about 2 billion euros in Spain. So these are huge amounts that are being spent today. Of course, if we improve treatment, then we'll have to save some of the current costs and invest them in new therapy that will help cure. So I think that we need to make sure that we do things properly, that we do it in an organized fashion, that we incorporate these new innovations of science and medicine into health, but in an orderly way, so that we don't have risks because of a bad use or bad introduction of these innovations in our health system.
Points that she made, and also that Fiona mentioned, we are all patients at one point in our lives. So I think patient participation is actually person participation, and we have to remember that. I'd like to go back to the survey that was presented at the beginning of the discussion. Would you want to know at a very early stage if you would be likely to develop a particular disease based on your genetic makeup? Now, we only had 16 answers. I mean, not many joined in, but we do have a 100% yes. Deepak, Looking at that question, did you expect this outcome?
I didn't expect it to be 100%. No, this is surprising.
Oh, but thank you for the 16 that answered. Thank you very much. I think it is time to open the floor for questions that was promised to you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and a microphone will be brought to you. Please don't be shy if you have any questions. Oh, yes. Yeah, on that side, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the insight. I find it very valuable. But you guys mentioned the biggest elephant in the room to be prevention. And I think that is one big elephant in the room, but prevention is not only part of it. I think the hypocrisy is sometimes on the revenue, because companies, governments, they want to make money, and that also confronts ethics. So I would like to pose back to the panel, what is the limit? Where is it that we draw the line between the ethics, saving people, and making money? Prevention is very important. Prevention goes together with education, goes together with legislation, goes together with the investment of governments into all what it takes. But private companies, they make money. We know that drugs are there and they could have saved millions of lives, but because of patents, because of other interests, this has not been the case. So could you give your perspective back? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very important but very difficult question. Would anyone like to tackle that question? Yes. Fiona, please.
I'll certainly go first, although I hope we hear from others on the panel. Yeah, couldn't agree more. EFA, the European Public Health Alliance, we do have an Access to Medicines campaign, which is very active, and we are very much asking for the whole reimbursement and pharma funding model to be changed. There has been a little bit of movement on this in the last few years, with particularly the Dutch presidency in 2016. And as we speak, there is a debate, or there will be a debate this week at the World Health Assembly on transparency that's been put forward by the Italian government and appears to be supported by France. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more that could be done on this point. And I think if precision medicine is to go forward, it is an issue which is going to have to be tackled, and member states are going to have to reassess their relationship with the pharmaceutical industry and their willingness to pay what is sometimes asked of them to pay.
So many players actually involved in the point that she was making. Anyone else like to answer that question? Thomas, please.
I think governments may not be able to do a good decision making because these are very specifically and scientifically specialized topics. So they need to work with the specialists and maybe also a financial specialist to draw some scenario and define the rules, maybe at European level or international level.
And she also mentioned profit. Deepak?
So as I said earlier, I just don't think it's a one-person answer. You know, in order to make this work, you need all stakeholders together at the table to figure out solutions. As I said in the beginning, the OECD, there's three objectives. One is making this accessible, making innovations accessible, making sure that we have a healthcare system that's affordable and sustainable, and finding ways to secure innovation. When I think to cancer itself, the number of innovations that are now available for cancer, it's unprecedented. It will dramatically change the lives of many patients that are suffering, because ultimately everybody in this room has the same goal, which is to improve patient care. And we have to find ways to be able to do it collectively. But in order for that to happen, you're right, Fiona, the systems do need to adapt, right? Everything from regulatory to reimbursement has to adapt. The approach with the industry has to adapt. But this also requires that we have to invest more in healthcare, that we have to have flexible frameworks for access, that we have to empower citizens and patients and healthcare systems to really understand and be able to navigate through it. So I just don't think it's a one stakeholder answer. I think it's everyone working collectively to be able to find new solutions.
Right. Thank you very much, Deepak. I'd like to mention some of the questions that were asked on BCAST. It is specified to the Spanish Minister, Luisa. How is Spain acting in order to assure that gene-driven therapies are accessible to all?
Sí. Bueno,
Well, I said this very briefly at the beginning. In fact, and I'm also going to talk about access to drugs here. There was a public consultation in investigating a drug that's now available and it's being used in Spain. And this means that we're also controlling expenditure and that we're also working on prevention. If you have an innovative drug and it's now available, you're going to have maybe speculation, and this is something that we need to be careful with. It's not just a question of countries. We have to work also at European level, and at European level we have to make sure that drugs are affordable for everybody, to make sure that we don't have speculation on behalf of a company, a private company, or an industry. What we do in Spain is that, well, first of all, we establish negotiation with the pharmaceutical industry. We try to understand the drug, what it offers, what its benefits are. And we need, of course, to make sure that there's public research on drugs. And with this public research, we're in a better position to negotiate and bargain on the price, to have a more affordable price. And then there is also the professionals. When there is a need to use an innovative drug, we work with the health administration, with the regional authorities, and we work with the Ministry of Health. And we have, in fact, a commission of experts and professionals who know about these new drugs. It's their fields of expertise. They know about genetic medicine. And it's this commission that actually gives advice. And we have 8 centers in Spain that will provide this treatment. In that way, we ensure quality and the safety of the patient in receiving this treatment, because, of course, we're talking here about drugs that very often have side effects, and sometimes these side effects are quite large, and so we really need to make sure that the patient is being fully followed, and we need to ensure the full safety of the patient while ensuring the quality of the health outcome. So if a child, because we started with a child suffering from leukemia, but it would apply, of course, to adults, any adult or any child that needs this treatment for leukemia, we need to make sure that wherever the person lives, whatever region of Spain they live in, they will have access to one of these specialized centers. And whatever their economic background, you know that we have universal coverage now in Spain, so everybody has access.
On a very limited time schedule, but I would like to take one more question from the audience. Anyone? Okay, if not, I'm going to ask Thomas to make a final message before we close the session.
So I think the future of medicine lies in the precision, preventive and personalized medicine, but we really need to focus on its implementation to make most of it.
Okay, good point. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you, and let's have another round of applause for our excellent panelists. Thank you very much.
No, it's just if you want to. Yeah, sure. You know where it is? Yeah,
break now, right?